I phoned my parents to tell them my wife had been killed in a terrible accident and that my little boy was lying in the ICU fighting for his life. But their first reaction was, "It's your sister's birthday." I quietly ended the call. Just 1 week later, they arrived at my door demanding half of the settlement money. Hello, Reddit. I've been turning this over in my head for months, trying to decide whether to share it. And even though it's been close to a year since everything blew apart, I still need to get this off my chest because what went down was so insane, I sometimes question whether it really happened. I'm 32, a carpenter who specializes in custom residential projects around Phoenix, and it's a good trade with solid pay. I've built everything from extravagant wine cellars for Scottsdale elites to custom cabinetry worth more than the average person's vehicle. My wife Nora was 29, a third-grade teacher at the local elementary school, the kind of teacher kids remember forever, always coming home with hilarious little stories about her students that would leave me laughing over dinner. Then there was Owen, our 7-year-old son, bright, sharp, already, beating me at chess, and with a laugh that was an exact echo of his mom's. We were the couple people joked still actually liked each other after 7 years of marriage. We had Friday movie nights, Sunday pancake competitions, all the supposedly boring routines that mean nothing until they vanish. Nora teased me when I got too intense about Owen's Little League games, and I teased her about crying during Disney movies. Just normal, happy family life. My own family, though, had long treated me like their personal ATM. My dad drifted from one warehouse job to the next. My mom picked up cleaning gigs whenever she could, and they barely scraped by in a house that should have been condemned years ago. My younger sister, Sabrina, 28, still lived with them, juggling a part-time boutique job while pursuing her fantasy of becoming an influencer. For more than 10 years, I had been the financial backbone holding them up. Rent short? Call Sean. Car broke down? Call Sean. Sabrina maxed out her cards on cheap designer knockoffs and endless ring lights? Call Sean. I always paid because someone had to, right? I was the only one who ever got it together. Just 2 months before the tragedy, I'd bailed them out again. Nora used to remind me, "Babe, you're not their dad," whenever I stressed about sending more money. But she never pressed too hard because she knew I carried guilt for being the one who pulled his life together while they didn't. March had begun like any other. I was on a Scottsdale job site installing custom kitchen cabinets when my phone rang from an unknown number. I nearly let it go to voicemail. "Is this Sean Sterling?" the voice asked. "Yeah, who's calling?" "This is Sergeant Herrera with Phoenix PD. Sir, there's been an accident involving your wife and child. You need to come immediately." The world froze. I remember my tools slipping, my expensive router crashing across the marble floor, and some part of my brain absurdly thinking I should pick it up. "Sir, are you there? It was a vehicle collision. Your wife's car was struck by another driver. Sir, your wife was pronounced dead at the scene. Your son is in critical condition. I can't recall driving to the hospital. Can't recall parking." My buddy Rick found me 20 minutes later, still sitting in my truck in the ER lot with the engine running, staring blankly ahead. Rick has been my best friend since college. We played ball together at ASU before I blew my knee. He's not the sentimental type. When life crashes, he just handles things. "Give me your keys," he said, opening my door. "I'm driving." Inside, a doctor explained that Nora had picked Owen up early for a dentist appointment when, around 2 p.m., an intoxicated driver named Kevin Walsh blasted through a red light at Madison and Central. Blood results showed he was heavily impaired, way above the legal limit. His F-150 smashed into Nora's Civic at high speed. Nora was killed instantly. Owen suffered devastating injuries, brain trauma, broken bones, internal damage. They placed him in a medical coma to reduce swelling. "The next 72 hours are critical," the doctor warned. I sat there in that sterile room, drowning in medical terminology I couldn't grasp, thinking only that Owen had been excited about showing off his backstroke at swim practice, and now he might never open his eyes again. That's when I called my parents. Mom answered on the fourth ring. The background filled with music, laughter, party chatter. Sean, you caught us in the middle of Sabrina's birthday celebration. Everyone's here. Hang on, I'll step outside so convenienty. But she knew I carried guilt for being the one who pulled his life together while they didn't. March had begun like any other. I was on a Scottsdale job site installing custom kitchen cabinets when my phone rang from an unknown number. I nearly let it go to voicemail. Is this Sean Sterling? The voice asked. Yeah, who's calling? This is Sergeant Herrera with Phoenix PD. Sir, there's been an accident involving your wife and child. You need to come immediately. The world froze. I remember my tools slipping, my expensive router crashing across the marble floor, and some part of my brain absurdly thinking I should pick it up. Sir, are you there? It was a vehicle collision. Your wife's car was struck by another driver. Sir, your wife was pronounced dead at the scene. Your son is in critical condition. I can't recall driving to the hospital. Can't recall parking. My buddy Rick found me 20 minutes later, still sitting in my truck in the ER lot with the engine running, staring blankly ahead. Rick has been my best friend since college. We played ball together at ASU before I blew my knee. He's not the sentimental type. When life crashes, he just handles things. Give me your keys, he said, opening my door. I'm driving. Inside, a doctor explained that Nora had picked Owen up early for a dentist appointment when, around 2 p.m., an intoxicated driver named Kevin Walsh blasted through a red light at Madison and Central. Blood results showed he was heavily impaired, way above the legal limit. His F-150 smashed into Nora's Civic at high speed. Nora was killed instantly. Owen suffered devastating injuries, brain trauma, broken bones, internal damage. They placed him in a medical coma to reduce swelling. The next 72 hours are critical, the doctor warned. I sat there in that sterile room, drowning in medical terminology I couldn't grasp, thinking only that Owen had been excited about showing off his backstroke at swim practice, and now he might never open his eyes again. That's when I called my parents. Mom answered on the fourth ring. The background filled with music, laughter, party chatter. Sean, you caught us in the middle of Sabrina's birthday celebration. Everyone's here. Hang on, I'll step outside so I can hear you better. I could hear her heels clicking, but the party noise kept buzzing. Mom, listen, Nora's gone. Car accident. Owen's in a coma, and they don't know if he'll make it. Silence stretched before she finally whispered, Oh my God, Sean, that's awful. I waited for her to say they were coming, that they'd drop everything and drive the 2 hours to Phoenix. Instead, she said, Honey, I'm so sorry, but we can't leave right now. It's Sabrina's birthday party. We rented out the back room at Romano's. Everyone's here. Her co-workers, Tanner, our relatives. The cake alone cost a fortune, and we've already paid for the meals. It would be so rude to bail now. I pulled the phone away, convinced I misheard. Mom, my wife is dead. Your grandson might not live through the night. I know, sweetheart. We're heartbroken. But Sabrina has been planning this for months. It's her golden birthday, turning 28 on the 28th. She says it's the most important day of her life. Plus, Tanner's parents are here, meeting everyone for the first time. You understand, right? We'll head down tomorrow morning. Well, maybe tomorrow afternoon. Your father has that county interview, and we can't afford for him to miss it. Plus, Sabrina wants brunch with Tanner to recover and open gifts, but we'll come as soon as we can. The call ended with hollow promises and left me sick to my stomach. Rick came back into the waiting room, carrying coffee and in and out. Somehow, he had already contacted Nora's parents in Colorado, booked their flights, and called my boss for emergency leave, all while I sat paralyzed in shock. Your folks coming? He asked, sinking into the plastic chair. Sabrina's birthday party, I muttered. Rick just gave a knowing nod. He'd seen enough of my family to understand. The next 3 days blurred together. Owen underwent 2 emergency surgeries to ease. Brain swelling. I lived in a recliner beside his bed, listening to machines keeping him alive. staring at monitors that dictated whether my son lived or died. Nora's parents arrived and rotated shifts with me, bringing food I couldn't touch, and arranging a funeral I couldn't bear to face. My parents called twice. They checked in only twice, once with a quick update, and then again to promise they would definitely come by early next week after Dad's interview and Sabrina's post-birthday brunch with Tanner. But they never showed up, not early that week, and not later either. During that stretch, it was Rick who practically moved into my home, making sure the bills were handled, the lawn trimmed, and Owen's room kept in perfect condition, while also coordinating guys from our crew to cover hospital visits so I could grab a shower and sometimes even sleep in a real bed. It felt like genuine backup from people who actually cared. On day 6, Owen opened his eyes for a few fleeting seconds, unfocused and confused, but clearly conscious. And I broke down harder than I had since the day Nora died, clutching his hand and whispering over and over that Daddy was right there. The doctor warned that waking up was only the very first step. Brain injuries were unpredictable, and we had to prepare for possibilities like memory loss, cognitive impairment, or personality shifts. But still, my son was alive, and that was everything to me. His recovery, though, was grueling. This boy, who used to beat me at chess without breaking a sweat, could no longer remember basic shapes, and he often looked at me with terrified, uncertain eyes, sometimes recognizing me, sometimes not. The brain damage had weakened his left side, so holding a spoon or walking straight became triumphs we celebrated. He needed speech therapy 3 times a week to rebuild his vocabulary, physical therapy to regain motor control, the full package. I sat in on every single session, taking notes, and learning the exercises so I could continue the work with him at home, even turning our living room into a miniature therapy center. Meanwhile, the hospital bills piled up in staggering amounts. Even with insurance, the numbers were sickening. The ICU stay alone was nearing 6 figures. The rehab facility demanded thousands monthly, and then there were specialized equipment costs, home modifications, and tutoring. I found myself awake at 3 in the morning, punching desperate calculations into a calculator, trying to figure out how to make it all work. That was when Jeffrey Park called. Rick's cousin had recommended him for personal injury cases, and Jeffrey had a reputation for squeezing insurance companies until they paid. At our first meeting, he said, "Mr. Sterling, I've reviewed everything. Kevin Walsh has a record. 2 previous incidents, multiple license suspensions, and he was driving uninsured in defiance of court orders. But the vehicle belonged to his employer, and their commercial policy carries multi-million-dollar liability coverage. I had never even imagined that kind of money before, never seen a check with more than 4 zeros, let alone thought about one. Considering your wife's death and your son's injuries," Jeffrey continued, "combined with Walsh's undeniable pattern of negligence, the insurance company wants to settle quickly. They cannot risk a jury trial where an impaired driver killed a teacher and left a 7-year-old with brain damage. The first offer that came back was massive. Jeffrey said we could negotiate for more, but it already surpassed anything I could mentally process. More than enough to guarantee Owen's lifelong care. More than enough to make sure he would never go without." When I told my parents during one of their rare weekly check-ins, I didn't mention an amount. Only that things were looking good financially, and the medical bills would not crush us. Their reaction was instant. "Oh, thank God," Mom exclaimed. "We've been so worried about the financial strain. Situations like this can destroy families, if not managed properly." I asked what she meant, and she went on, "Well, you'll need help handling that kind of money. Your father knows a lot about investments and financial planning. Once the settlement is finalized, we should all sit down together." This from my father, the man who had burned through his own inheritance in months on a fishing boat he barely used, offering investment advice. But I let it go, too exhausted to fight and just grateful Owen was improving. The settlement was finalized on a Tuesday in early June, and Jeffrey structured it wisely. The majority went into a medical trust for Owen that I could only access for approved expenses. with enough liquid funds set aside for immediate needs and household costs. It was smart, secure, exactly what Nora would have wanted. That evening, I called my parents to give a simple update. "Sean, that's wonderful," Mom practically shouted. "We need to celebrate. Why don't we all come down this weekend?" I told her there was no need, reminding her Owen still had therapy, and we were trying to keep his schedule consistent. But Dad chimed in immediately. He must have been on speakerphone, saying, "This isn't just about celebrating. We need to discuss the family situation. These settlements involve a lot of considerations." I asked what he meant, and Mom jumped back in with, "Family support structures, making sure everyone is taken care of during recovery. Sabrina has been struggling so much since her birthday. It hit her hard, realizing she's almost 30 with nothing to show for it. And your father's been dealing with back issues." And there it was, the real motive. I should have predicted it. "Of course, the settlement is for Owen's care," she said. "But these awards are usually much larger than the actual medical costs. They also account for emotional distress, family, suffering, loss of companionship. It's not all designated strictly for medical bills." Just the idea of my parents angling for a portion of Owen's settlement made me physically ill. I cut the call short with, "We'll talk when you visit." "This weekend then," Mom replied. "We'll drive down Saturday morning." And so they did, all three of them, Mom, Dad, and Sabrina, rolling up in Dad's beat-up Chevy like some bargain bin intervention squad. Mom carried a casserole and her church purse. Dad clutched a thick manila folder stuffed with documents. That looked far too official, and Sabrina scrolled on her phone as if she couldn't be more inconvenienced. Owen was napping upstairs, still worn out from therapy, while Rick was at the house helping me install safety rails in the bathroom. "Sean," Mom cooed, sweeping inside with air kisses that didn't even touch my face. "The house looks good, considering everything." "Rick," Dad nodded stiffly. Never liked Rick, probably because Rick saw through their nonsense and wasn't shy about calling it out. "Mr. and Mrs. Sterling," Rick replied neutrally. "Sabrina." Sabrina didn't even look up from her phone. "Yeah, hey, can we make this quick? I've got actual plans tonight." We sat in the living room. Dad opened his manila folder like he was conducting a business meeting. "Sean, we've been researching settlement distributions," he began, checking his notes. "Typically, these awards include compensation for the entire family's emotional suffering." "The entire family?" Rick asked from the kitchen doorway. He wasn't supposed to be part of this, but I was glad he stayed close. Mom shot Rick an annoyed look. "This is family business, Rick." "Rick stays," I said. "He's been more family to me these past few months than anyone else." That hit home, but Mom pushed forward with that fake smile. "What your father means is we've all been affected by this tragedy. The stress, the emotional trauma, the financial impact of traveling back and forth, taking time off work." I almost laughed. They'd visited 3 times in 4 months, and taking time off work meant Dad calling in sick to his part-time warehouse gig. "Here's what we're thinking," Dad continued, pulling out what looked like a typed document. "Obviously, Owen's needs are a priority, but there should be provision for family support and recovery. We're proposing a 50-50 split. Half goes to Owen's trust, which makes sense given his injuries. The other half gets distributed among family members to help everyone rebuild." The room went dead quiet. "Rebuild from what?" I asked. Well, Sabrina spoke up for the first time. "The emotional trauma affects everyone, and there are practical considerations. I need to get my life together before I'm 30. This whole thing has been super stressful. I've barely been able to focus on my content creation because of all the family drama." She finally looked up, rolling her eyes. "Plus, let's be real. Nora would probably want her family taken care of, right? I mean, if she actually cared about family." The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. Rick went completely still. Even my parents looked shocked. "What did you just say?" I asked quietly. Sabrina shrugged like she hadn't just insulted my dead wife. "I'm just saying, if Nora was such a great person, like everyone keeps acting like, She would have wanted everyone supported. She always thought she was better than us anyway, with her teaching job and her perfect little house and her perfect little family. Sabrina, Mom said sharply. That's enough, is it though? She never liked us, never wanted Sean to help the family. Always made these passive-aggressive comments about enabling and boundaries. Maybe if she'd been more supportive of family, Sean wouldn't. Watch your damn mouth, I cut her off. This 28-year-old woman living in my parents' basement was talking trash. About my dead wife. Say one more word about Nora, and I will make you regret it. Okay, son. Dad jumped in quickly, trying to defuse the bomb Sabrina had just dropped. The way we see it, approximately half would go to family support. Sabrina would get a substantial portion to establish herself properly. Your mother and I would take. What about Nora's parents? Mom looked confused. What about them? Well, they're not blood relatives anymore, Dad said matter-of-factly. With Nora gone, they're essentially unrelated. Rick made a choking sound. They've been here every week, I said. They covered Owen's therapy when I couldn't be there. That's nice, Mom said in that condescending tone I remembered from childhood. But we're talking about practical considerations. Sabrina snorted. Nora's parents are loaded anyway. They don't need help like we do. I looked at these three people in my living room, in the house I'd shared with my dead wife, making plans to cash in on her death while insulting her memory. And think about this, I said. Of course, Mom beamed, but we should move quickly. You don't want that kind of money just sitting around unmanaged. They stayed another hour. When Owen woke up and came downstairs, they fussed over him for exactly 5 minutes before getting back to financial planning. Sabrina even tried to get him to pose for a selfie with Auntie, but gave up when he was too confused and tired to smile. Right, after they left, Rick and I sat in the kitchen having coffee and listening to Owen play video games. They're going to push this hard, Rick said. Yeah. You know what you're going to do. I watched Owen through the doorway. I'm going to give them exactly what they deserve, I said. Next week, I started documenting everything. Phone calls, texts, emails, building a record of exactly what they were doing. Mom called daily with ideas about the settlement. Dad sent printouts of investment strategies he'd found online. Sabrina's texts were the worst, though. Constant complaints about her life mixed with hints about needing money. Mom says, "You're being stubborn about sharing." Nora probably would have been more generous. She was always trying to prove she was the better person. LOL. I also kept 2 photos from my phone, pictures I'd taken for insurance and Owen's medical records. One showed the reality of our loss. The other showed Owen during his most critical period in the hospital. Unconscious and connected to medical equipment. Probably shouldn't have kept those pictures, but something about them felt important. These weren't abstract concepts or insurance numbers. This was reality. While my family celebrated Sabrina's birthday, Jeffrey had warned me about family pressure once settlement amounts became known. Unfortunately, sudden wealth brings out the worst in people. Even families can develop unrealistic expectations about funds designated for medical care. No kidding. Jeffrey kidding. I called my parents the following Saturday, told them I was ready for a serious conversation about the settlement. Could they come over that evening? Owen would be at his first sleepover since the accident, another milestone, so we could talk freely. Oh, wonderful, Mom gushed. Your father's been working on projections that'll be very helpful. They showed up at 7:00 p.m. sharp with backup. Sabrina and some guy in a cheap suit who turned out to be a financial advisor. Mom had somehow convinced to attend this mess. The financial advisor, Kevin something, looked uncomfortable from the start. Kept glancing around like he expected hidden cameras or wanted to make sure he knew where the exits were. See? Mom began settling into Nora's favorite chair without asking. We're so proud of how you've handled this. Takes real maturity to recognize family support is crucial during times like these. Dad had prepared an actual presentation. Pulled out poster. board with pie charts showing how the money could be distributed. As you can see, he explained, pointing at different wedges like he was presenting quarterly earnings. This distribution ensures everyone's needs are met while maintaining Owen's primary trust. The financial advisor was studying the charts with growing horror, probably realizing he'd been dragged into some kind of family extortion scheme. Sabrina's portion, Dad continued, would establish her properly. I've learned a lot about myself since my birthday, Sabrina added, clearly coached, but unable to hide her attitude. Your mother and I would use our portion for essential medical care, my back surgery, her dental work, plus retirement security. We've sacrificed so much over the years, helping you through college, supporting the family that had bailed me out exactly 0 times in 15 years, while I covered their bills constantly. The financial advisor finally spoke. I have to say, this is unusual. Settlement funds are typically managed by the primary beneficiary according to court structures. We understand the legal technicalities. Dad interrupted, waving his hand like the guy was being difficult. But this is about family values. Family support during tragedy. You're right, I said. This is about family values. Mom's face lit up like Christmas morning. I knew you'd see reason. Before we discuss specifics, I want everyone to understand exactly what we're talking about. I pulled out the first photo and placed it on the coffee table in front of the pie charts. The room went dead silent. This represents our loss, I said, watching their faces. This is what happened while you were celebrating Sabrina's birthday. Mom gasped and looked away. Dad went pale. The financial advisor stood up so fast, his chair nearly tipped over. I think there's been a misunderstanding, he stammered. This seems like a private matter. I should go. He practically ran for the door, leaving his business cards scattered on the table. I placed the second photo next to the first, and this is the other 50%. This is Owen in the pediatric ICU, fighting for his life while you were too busy to visit. Sabrina stared at the photos, all that manufactured attitude evaporating for the first time since she'd walked in. She looked genuinely uncomfortable. This is what you want a percentage of. This is what you think you're entitled to. My wife's death and my son's brain injury. And Sabrina, this is what you've been talking trash about while texting me. Sabrina had gone completely white. Sean, I didn't mean you meant every word. You've been insulting my dead wife. The silence was deafening. Now get out of my house, I said. All of you. Don't ever come back. They left without another word, abandoning the pie charts and business cards on my coffee table. I gathered them up and threw the whole pile in the fireplace, then sat in the dark, thinking about Nora and what she would have. Said about this mess, she would have been heartbroken, but not surprised. Some bridges are meant to burn. Thought that would end it. I was wrong. Within 48 hours, my phone started blowing up. Aunts, uncles, cousins. I hadn't talked to in years. Suddenly, everyone was an expert on family loyalty and financial responsibility. My parents had spun it as me refusing to help family in their time of need. Uncle Pete left a voicemail calling me a selfish jerk who forgot where he came from. Aunt Danielle texted, saying Nora would be ashamed of my behavior. Cousin, Jeff, who I'd bailed out of bankruptcy 3 years back, had the nerve to lecture me about family obligations in a Facebook message. But the real campaign started when they realized I wasn't answering calls. Sabrina's harassment was the worst. She'd moved from subtle insults to outright vicious attacks on Nora, probably figuring she had nothing left to lose. She started posting on social media about family members who think they're better than everyone else, and people who die and suddenly become saints, even though they were jerks in life. Anyone who knew, our family understood exactly who she meant. The breaking point was when she showed up at Owen's school trying to pick him up without authorization. The principal called me at work Thursday afternoon. Mr. Sterling, Your sister was here trying to pick up Owen. She said there was a family emergency, but Owen didn't seem to know her very well and became upset. We followed protocol and didn't release him, but I thought you should know. I drove to the school immediately. Owen was in the office looking confused and scared. When he saw me, he burst into tears. Sabrina had been under the influence at 2 p.m. on a Thursday and tried to kidnap my son. I called the police from the school parking lot, filed a report for attempted kidnapping, and made sure they understood Sabrina was not authorized to have any contact with Owen. Got a restraining order filed the same day. But her social media campaign got worse. She started posting long rants about narcissistic family members and dead people who get worshipped just because they're gone. She posted old photos of Nora from family gatherings with captions like, "Some people act sweet in public, but are manipulative behind closed doors." Meanwhile, my parents had started showing up in places they thought I'd be. Dad waited outside Owen's physical therapy session, trying to approach me in the parking lot. Mom called the therapy center, claiming to be Owen's emergency contact and asking about his progress. They kept trying to insert themselves into our lives, like nothing had happened. The harassment got bad enough I had to involve lawyers. Jeffrey sent cease and desist letters, spelling out exactly what would happen if they kept trying to contact me or Owen. Threats of restraining orders and stalking charges finally got their attention, but the damage was done. The extended family had picked sides, and most chose the version where I was the selfish jerk keeping money from people who helped raise me. Sabrina's campaign had poisoned half my relatives against Nora's memory. The saddest part, I felt nothing watching it happen. No guilt, no satisfaction, just empty acknowledgement that they'd shown their true colors. I was already exhausted. Owen was thriving though. Speech was almost back to normal. Motor skills improving daily. He'd started cracking jokes again. When he finally beat me at chess for the first time since the accident, took him 3 months to get back to that level. I let him stay up an extra hour, and we ordered Chinese food to celebrate. I'd also been working on myself, started hitting the gym, eating better, even began dating again. Nothing serious, just remembering I was still a person outside of being Owen's dad and caretaker. Nora would have wanted me to live, not just survive. The settlement money was doing exactly what it should, ensuring Owen got the best care while securing his future. Physical therapy, speech therapy, cognitive rehab, specialized tutoring, everything he needed to recover as fully as possible. Life was actually getting good again, which made what happened next even more infuriating. Here's what my family never understood about being the responsible one. When you stop enabling destructive behavior, people face the natural consequences of their choices, and Sabrina's situation deteriorated rapidly. First domino was her complete social media meltdown. The restraining order had cut off her access to Owen and me, so she doubled down on the online harassment, started posting increasingly unhinged rants about Nora, calling her everything from a fake person to worse things I won't repeat. That last post included a photo of Nora from our wedding with devil horn emojis drawn on. Real classy stuff. The problem was Phoenix isn't that big a city. People who knew Nora, her fellow teachers, parents from Owen's school, our neighbors started seeing Sabrina's posts. Screenshots got shared. Local community Facebook groups picked it up. Suddenly, Sabrina's campaign to destroy Nora's reputation was backfiring hard. Her boutique job disappeared first. The store owner got flooded with calls from customers who'd seen the posts and didn't want someone who attacked dead mothers representing their business. Then, her Instagram got reported and suspended for harassment. Her TikTok followed all those years building her brand gone in a week. But the real karma bomb was still coming. Tanner's parents had been following the whole mess on social media. Rich folks in Tucson, the kind who Googled their son's girlfriends and monitored their social media presence. They'd already been concerned about Sabrina's financial instability and family drama. Seeing her publicly attack a dead woman while trying to extort money from the widower was apparently the last straw. Tanner's mom called Tanner. Tanner called Sabrina, and the conversation was brutal. Screenshots of her posts got sent to his whole family. The engagement ring went back to Tanner's grandmother. Wedding plans were cancelled. But here's where it gets beautiful. Tanner's dad was a partner at a mid-sized law firm in Tucson. He'd been planning to offer Sabrina an entry-level position at their office as a wedding gift. Help her get started in a real career. That obviously wasn't happening now. Instead, he made some phone calls around Phoenix, let other firms know there was a woman named Sabrina Sterling who'd publicly harassed a dead accident victim and tried to extort settlement money. Made sure her name was flagged in HR systems across the city. Suddenly, she couldn't get hired anywhere decent. Every application led to a Google search that showed her harassment campaign, entry-level office jobs, retail positions, even fast food. Nobody wanted the liability of employing someone who'd proven she'd attack grieving families on social media. She tried changing her name on applications, but social media posts are permanent. Screenshots lived forever. Her face was attached to those horrible comments about Nora, and people had good memories. By August, she was completely unemployable, living with my parents full-time, no income, no prospects, watching her social media accounts dwindle as people unfollowed the crazy woman who attacked dead mothers. Her influencer dreams were dead, her reputation destroyed, her future ruined. The personal issues got worse. Day drinking turned into serious problems. First incident in September, lost her license and got mandatory counseling. The second incident in November led to legal consequences and court-ordered treatment. My parents couldn't afford the legal fees. Meanwhile, my parents discovered what life looked like without their monthly Sean bailout. Dad's back surgery got postponed indefinitely. Couldn't afford the deductible. Mom took on extra cleaning jobs to cover basics. Working for rich ladies in Iowa, Scottsdale who paid her to scrub toilets while their kids went to private schools. 3 adults with no money, no prospects, growing desperation. Sabrina blamed everyone else for her problems. Nora for turning me against family. Me for abandoning blood relatives. Tanner for being classist. Never once did she take responsibility. The family social media campaign backfired too, when you publicly air your financial desperation while attacking dead accident victims. People avoid you instead of helping. Church friends, neighbors, extended family. Everyone got real busy when my parents came around looking for handouts. By winter, they were facing eviction. Days to come up with back rent or find somewhere else to crash. That's when real desperation kicked in. And my sister, with serious problems and unemployable and facing homelessness, decided to make one last desperate play. December 20th, almost 9 months after the accident, Sabrina showed up at my door alone. Not with my parents this time, just her, looking like she'd been living in her car. She'd lost weight. Hair was greasy, clothes were dirty. Hands were shaking. Classic rock bottom look, but her eyes still had that same entitled rage. Owen was at a Christmas party with his classmates, another milestone in his recovery. The kid was doing so well. The doctors were talking about clearing him for contact sports by middle school, none of which Sabrina knew or cared about. "Sean," she said, swaying slightly on my porch, "we need to talk." "Nothing to talk about, please." But even her begging sounded angry. Just 5 minutes. I let her in, kept her in the entryway though. She was not. About to make herself at home in my place again. Not after everything. "I made mistakes," she began, without any build-up. "The posts, the things I said about Nora. I was upset, angry, and I went too far. Yes, I messed up, but it wasn't completely my fault. You cut us off suddenly, left us with nothing while you sat comfortably on millions. Family doesn't treat family like that." And there it was. Rock bottom still wasn't enough for her to own her choices completely. Even now, she had to point the finger at me, as if her downfall had nothing to do with her actions. She rambled on about how she posted those things because she was desperate, abandoned, left with no support, and how Nora would have understood, since she had been a teacher who knew how desperation could make people act irrationally. According to her, Nora's compassion would have excused everything. even though she had spent months dragging her name through the mud online. I stood there staring at this pathetic woman standing in my doorway, still daring to use my late wife's name after publicly humiliating her memory. "I'm just wondering, Sabrina," I asked coldly, "how do you even have the nerve to show your face here?" Her cheeks burned red as she stammered, "I was desperate. People say awful things when they're desperate. You know what it's like to lose everything." I cut her off. "I lost my wife, nearly lost my son. You lost your job because you chose to smear my dead wife. That's not the same." She looked down, voice trembling. "You're right, it isn't." And then she broke into sobs. "We're being evicted next week. Mom's working 3 jobs, but it's still not enough. Dad can't work because of his back, and I can't get hired anywhere because of those screenshots. We need your help." "Too late," I told her, and Ty added firmly, "You need to leave now." She shook her head, pleading. "I didn't mean it. I was furious about Tanner, about losing everything, and I took it out on her. But Nora's gone, Sean. She can't be hurt anymore. We're alive, and we're suffering." That's when it hit me how broken she really was. "You want to know what Nora would honestly think about all this?" I asked. Sabrina nodded eagerly, as if convinced she had finally found the argument that might sway me. "She'd think you're exactly the kind of person she fought to protect our family from," I said flatly. "She'd believe that attacking a dead mother while trying to profit off her child's brain injury only proves she was right about your character. And she'd believe Owen and I are far better off without you." Hope drained from her eyes, and in its place came raw fury. "Screw you, Sean," she spat. "Screw you and your dead wife. She turned you into a selfish bastard." That was the moment I snapped, my hand tightening around her neck. "Don't you dare," I hissed, then shoved her toward the open door. "Get the hell out of here, and don't ever come near me or my son again, because if you do, I promise you I'll make your life worse than it already is." The shock on millionaire. Her face made her look as if I'd slapped her. She stood there like a beaten dog. "So you're really going to let your own family end up homeless rather than share your blood money?" "Sean, you can't escape this." She stormed off, shrieking about how karma would get me in the end, before climbing into some battered old Honda I didn't even recognize, probably borrowed, maybe stolen, and vanishing into the night. 2 days later, Rick called me with an update. Sabrina had been arrested for public intoxication and assault. Apparently, after leaving my house, she'd gone to a bar, drunk herself senseless, and attacked some woman who resembled the witch teacher she still blamed for stealing my brother. She spent Christmas in jail. My parents called me for bail money. I ignored the calls. They even showed up outside my office on New Year's Eve. Looking a decade older, but security escorted them straight out. The last I heard, they'd ended up at my aunt's place in Flagstaff, sleeping on couches and scraping by with odd jobs. Sabrina was in a court-ordered rehab program, facing charges, and unemployable, her once precious social media accounts deactivated, her influencer fantasy completely destroyed, her reputation beyond repair. She had ruined her own life with her choices, and watching it unravel brought me nothing but grim satisfaction. Meanwhile, Owen is thriving. Doctors say his brain is essentially healed, just minor motor skill issues remain. Rick checks on us daily, and Nora's parents call every week to speak with Owen. That is what real family looks like. And as for Sabrina, I know now some people never earn forgiveness, no matter how much they claim to suffer.